I'm Rachel DeWaskin. I teach fiction here in the Committee on Creative Writing. And on behalf of the University of Chicago, I want to welcome everyone and thank the Dedmon family for tonight's reading. We feel very fortunate in the creative writing universe here to be able to invite brilliant writers because of the Claire and Emmett Dedmon Writers in Residence program. In honor of Emmett Dedmon, who was a University of Chicago graduate and also the editor of The Maroon, and Claire Dedmon, who was on the university's women's board and who loved the school. Their son, Jonathan Dedmon, who is a champion of readers and writers, and our friend, is here in the audience tonight. So thank you to him and to his parents, in whose honor this reading is happening. This year's writer in residence is Sarah Manguso. In her memoir, The Two Kinds of Decay, she writes, "I didn't know it at the time, but I was paying attention. I was not hoping I would learn how to do it or despairing that I might not learn how to do it. I was unaware that I was learning or practicing or doing anything. I was unaware I was doing anything except nothing." But her lines, and reading her work, one thinks also her mind, are always busy doing something precise and industrious. Her language works in both her poetry and prose the way a metrical engine should, musically, and with a clarity so distilled and careful that it creates suspense, a kind of plot. We want to see what she'll see next and read what she makes of it. Across her work, the illness and recovery and the two kinds of decay, the floating predictors and measurements of her poetry and Sista Vietor, the grief of the guardian, and the wit and difficult wisdom of 300 arguments, Manguso gives us just the medicine she prescribes in her memoir's final lines: brightness. You can't learn from remembering, she writes. You can't learn from guessing. You can only learn from moving forward at the rate you are moved, as brightness into brightness. Her work is infused with mystery and wonder, even though it's so clear she makes that clarity seem easy, like an Olympic athlete, like a master of form. Her books are populated by white dwarves, red giants, black holes, a memorable sandwich, an unmemorable flight of stairs. In other words, the absolute singularities of which each human life is composed. She gives us the experience of plasma cleaning, the feeling of a needle as it makes its way into all of us, manages somehow to suggest both the books she's written and those she has yet to write, sometimes the ones she's avoiding writing. As she puts it in the poem, Tell Me Who, all we did was written down. This made it beautiful and different. And we think, reading that, exactly, all she did was written down. Here for us, aren't we lucky? But because she's about nuance, about contradiction, about peeling back the truths and investigating them further, which gives her poem their wisdom, she ends here instead. Now it is no longer real. Soon it will never have happened. In fact, what happens in her books is lasting. The language and observations stay lively and real. They make us think and rethink. In the poem Oblivion Speaks, Manguso writes, "As oblivion, I am what's left when there is nothing left." And in that line, she collapses the distance between the world and the book, between us and her, between something and the nothing that is both our only certainty and the thing about which we know least, oblivion. That she should narrate the poem in Oblivion's voice is vintage Manguso, smart, scary, and strangely funny. The world has noticed her inimitable observations of it. She's been awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Wellcome Trust Book Prize, a Rome Prize, and a Hodder Fellowship. Her books include 300 Arguments, Ongoingness, The End of a Diary, The Guardians, The Two Kinds of Decay, Hard to Admit and Harder to Escape, Sista Vietor, and The Captain Lands in Paradise. She has a BA from Harvard and an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and she has taught at Columbia, Princeton, NYU, St. Mary's College, the Pratt Institute, and the New School. We are delighted to have her here with us tonight. Please join the University of Chicago and the Claire and Emmett Dedmon Writers in Residence program in welcoming Sarah Manguso.
Rachel, thank you for that very silencing and very gracious introduction. Well, what a night to be in Chicago, as I have said more than once today. It's really very exciting for me, having grown up in Boston and been neither a person who followed sports nor particularly enthusiastic about the Red Sox in particular. But being with Red Sox fans in 2004, after we had waited 86 years for a series and then watching the Sox win, I was trying to articulate to a friend of mine this afternoon just what Chicago is up against, and it's not just, you know, the historic, exciting, happy moment. It may well be the eve of an entire city having to think about itself in a new way. You know, those 86 years that everybody in Boston thought of themselves as scrappy underdogs who were well loved but would never exactly rise out of that level of existence. Just, it changed in a moment, and it never changed back. And what's even more remarkable is that it happened 2 more times, and then it was no longer really, it was no longer historic. But that first time, nobody forgets that. Nobody fails to remember at least something about that experience. I'm going to read to you tonight from a new book that doesn't come out until next year, and it's called 300 Arguments. It's an essay about desire, ambition, and failure, which seems really relevant to everything that's happening, you know, politically and world and baseball-wise in this country tonight and this week. Rachel mentioned you had a funny line about books that I was working on or avoiding working on, and it's probably worth saying that this book is a product of procrastination. I was trying to work on what I thought of as my big book, a long book, a book about social class in Boston, which I've been trying to write for the last decade. And I'm very attracted to the idea of writing a long book. Like, I think it's you know, it's a very distinguished thing to write a long book and, you know, do some real research and yet and I come up with all these really great ideas for long books, but I never want to execute on them. As soon as I come up with the idea, I immediately start doing something else. And this book, 300 Arguments, is one of those something elses. I wrote about the first 100 arguments at the same time that I was actively trying to write that long book. And then I thought, okay, I'll do 200. So I put the big book aside and I did 200 arguments, and I still felt like writing more, and so I assigned myself 300. And then I got to about 290, and then the last dozen or so, I kept, you know, writing them and getting rid of some I didn't like, and, you know, getting the number back up. It was hard enough to get to 300 that it felt like the end of, you know, a legitimate project. And so I put them together and I made it a book, and then I thought I would, you know, of course, return to writing the big book, and then I immediately started writing more arguments, and I actually have about 50. So that's the first thing. I just want to say one other thing before I read to you. They look like this. They're between 1 and 5 sentences long. Most of them are 2 or 3 sentences long. They are neither narratives nor aphorisms nor memories, but they encompass all of those forms. And I chose the word argument to describe them because all of the archaic meanings of argument, when it was first kind of coming into itself as a word in Latin, are really diverse and I think beautifully descriptive of many of the things that I was trying to do. And I want to read a short list of meanings of the word argument. Subject, theme, sign, mark, token, proof, hint, plot, declaration, evidence, burden, complaint, accusation, denouncement, and betrayal. I'm going to read the first half of them to you now, first 100 or so. A great photographer insists on writing poems. A brilliant essayist insists on writing novels. A singer with a voice like an angel insists on singing only her own terrible songs. So when people tell me I should try to write this or that thing I don't want to write, I know what they mean. You might as well start by confessing your greatest shame. Anything else would just be exposition. It can be worth foregoing marriage for sex, and it can be worth foregoing sex for marriage. It can be worth foregoing parenthood for work, and it can be worth foregoing work for parenthood. Every case is orthogonal to all the others. That's the entire problem. I wrote my college application essay about playing in a piano competition, knowing I would lose to the kid who had played just before me. Even while I played, knowing I would lose, I wrote, still, I played to give the judges something to remember. I pretended my spasms of self-regard transcended the judges' informed decisions about the pianists who were merely the best. I got into college. I assume the cadets are gay, but then I see they are merely unafraid of love. They're preparing to go to war, and with so little time to waste, they say what they mean. At faculty meetings, I sat next to people whose books had sold 2 million copies. Success seemed so close, just within reach. On subway benches, I sat next to people who were gangrenous, dying, but I never thought I'd catch what they had. What's worse, offending someone or lying to someone? Saying something stupid when it's your turn, or not saying anything? Tell me which, and I'll tell you your problem. The trouble with comparing yourself to others is that there are too many others. Using all others as your control group, all your worst fears and all your fondest hopes are at once true. You are good, you are bad, you are abnormal, you are just like everyone else. Some people ditch friends and lovers because it's easier to get new ones than to resolve conflicts with the old ones, particularly if resolving a conflict requires one to admit error or practice mercy. I'm describing an asshole, but what if the asshole thinks he's ditching an asshole? Inner beauty can fade too. The water birds near my house are in middle school. The coot's voices crack. The seagulls bully the ducks. The egret just got braces and stands humiliated by himself. Many bird names are onomatopoetic. They name themselves. Fish, on the other hand, have to float there and take what they get. I used to avoid people when I was afraid I loved them too much. 10 years in one case. Then, after I had been married long enough that I was married even in my dreams, I became able to go to those people, to feel that desire, and to know it would stay a feeling. In a dream, my friend and I begin the act and both immediately want it to be over. But we have to continue, impelled by some obscure reason. I wake wondering whether we could ever enjoy it. I think about it all day, really dedicate myself to it. I think about it for 2 more days, and that's how I fall in love with my friend. Like a vase, a heart breaks once. After that, it just yields to its flaws. In the morning, I wake amid fading scenes of different characters, different settings, all restatements of that first desire, a ghost who haunts me as the beauty he was at 16. My friend learns Chinese and moves to China, but her limited vocabulary is good for grocery shopping, not for falling in love. When her heart breaks, she is obliged to ask, "Why won't you fuck me?" I've put horses in poems, but I've never ridden one. They just seem like such a good thing to put into literature. Biographies should also contain the events that failed to foreshadow. Facility means prison, a building, lifelessness, art, or grace, athletes. Within a gesture of apparent perfection, a mortal heart must beat. I remember a girl who was famous in school for having woken from a drunken blackout and said to whomever was there, "Are you my judges?" In real life, my healthy boyfriend said that he envied my paralytic disease, that I'd earned the right to a legitimate nervous breakdown. A few years later, he was in an accident and became paralyzed from the neck down. That's just bad writing. It isn't so much that geniuses make it look easy, it's that they make it look fast. Of a page of perfect prose I read in a dream, I remember only this. "Thank you," she said. Her simple answer concealed the truth. The man who had me in a phone booth married quickly after the affair ended. His novel had everything in it: the phone booth, the shame, the sash he sewed to wear over the surgical appliance in his belly. In the novel, it covers a plaster leg cast. The front page of his website is a glowing glass phone booth standing alone in snow. The book got bad reviews. He has 2 children. I never joined Facebook because I want to preserve my old longings, and also yours. We like stories that are false and seem true, realist novels, that are true and seem false, true crime, that are false and seem false, dragons and superheroes, or that are true and seem true, but it's harder to agree on what that is. The fastest way to revise a piece of work is to send it late at night to someone whose opinion you fear. Then rewrite it, praying you'll finish in time to send a new version by morning. Oh, that one landed. Writers in the audience. Having a worst regret betrays your belief that one misstep caused all your undeserved misfortune. I don't write long forms because I'm not interested in artificial deceleration. As soon as I see the glimmer of a consequence, I pull the trigger. My teacher cried while I listened. None of his books had ever made money, not even the famous one, he said. He'd spent his life trying to write perfect books, and when he tried to make a little money, he couldn't. I didn't think I'd ever feel as old as he seemed at that moment, but here we are. The difference between writers under 30 and writers over 40 is that the former, like everyone their age, already know how to act like famous people, people whose job it is to be photographed. I wish I could ask the future whether I should give up or keep trying. Then again, what if trying, even in the face of certain failure, feels as good as accomplishing? What if it's even better? And here we are again. Horror is terror that stayed the night. I can't bear to think of my dead friend, but I don't mind rereading a few things that have nothing to do with him and that always move me to tears. The grief reservoir empties to a manageable level. In this way, I can mourn him without having to think about him. There will come a time when people decide you've had enough of your grief, and they'll try to take it away from you. You'll never know what your mother went through. I've known a few people who approached the act as a perfectible art. I've known some great perverts, too. Others were in love. Desire abandoned them all. It's the ones I didn't fuck or didn't fuck enough or haven't fucked enough that I still dream about. In 9th grade, I was too afraid to speak to the boy I loved, so I mailed him a black paper heart every week for a year. I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid of my feeling. It was more powerful than God. If we'd ever spoken, it might have burned the whole place down. Shame needs an excuse to feel ashamed. It apologizes for everything, even itself. I've never seen a ghost, and I don't believe in them. I might see one tonight, but even then, I wouldn't believe in ghosts. I'd believe in that ghost. Just before the poetry reading starts, I ask the overgrown boy sitting next to me why he likes poetry, what happened to him. And he says, "I went to war." The affair is over, but at least things have gone somewhere, if only into oblivion. And maybe oblivion is what I wanted all along. The dark owns everything, but our sun comes out often enough that we think the universe is half dark, half light. When the worst comes to pass, the first feeling is relief. Rock faces bodies of water, the crotch of a tree. It's harder to personify the sky. Bad art is from no one to no one. Talking with someone who reveals nothing, I hear myself madly filling the emptiness with information about myself. Your deathbed self floats out of the time machine to tell you that everything will be fine. Your kindergarten self floats out and asks you to tell her the same thing. Imagine them standing hand in hand, waiting for you to choose between them. I write in defense of the beliefs I fear are least defensible. Everything else feels like homework. Our 5th grade class assembled cat skeletons from bags of bones and blocks of red-brown plasticine. One of my friends worked on the vertebrae, hastily sticking the clay between them. I worked on the jaw, just that one joint, trying to align the two bones perfectly. Even when I was 10, I wanted to master one small thing. When I think I should change, I remember that I've never really changed. I might never need to. Finally, a form I'll always have time to write, but of course it demands more than time. Perfection and beauty overlap, but incompletely. While I lie on the table, studded with needles, the energy of my body swells beyond my body and into a halo about 4 inches out into the room, just barely distinguishing me from the rest of the world. With great and solemn portent, my teacher announced she would tell us something that her teacher had told her, and that her teacher's teacher had told him, and so on, back to Yeats. The thing to remember is that no one ever finds out you don't know what you're doing. My other teacher, after I asked him a contrived question about nothing, paused and very kindly said, "The thing to remember is that I only have about 35, 40 years left to live." My least favorite received idea about writing is that one must find one's voice as if it's there inside you, ready to be turned on like a player piano. Like character, its very existence depends on interaction with the world. But don't forget, they pay by the pound, says my friend who is well compensated for writing long books and is teaching me how to get paid more for mine. Faced with a camera lens hideously over-witnessed, I immediately start trying to impersonate myself. The trouble with letting people see you at your worst isn't that they'll remember, it's that you'll remember. I knew I was getting somewhere when I finished writing something and didn't think, it isn't my fault that my ill health prevented me from perfecting this, but instead thought, well, this is the best I can do. After I stopped hoping to outgrow them, my fears were no longer a burden. Hope is what made them a burden. My first dozen romances weren't interesting because I wasn't learning anything because I was trying so hard not to. I was trying to stop time. After I publish an autobiographical essay, men accuse me of having tried and failed to present myself as likable, and women accuse me of having tried and failed to represent them. I can't believe this is happening, I thought, the first time we fucked 14 years ago, and keep thinking. We married other people, had children. I still can't believe it. I might never believe it. I don't love writing. I love having a problem I believe I might someday write my way out of. I read 300-year-old graffiti at Eton and 600-year-old graffiti at a castle in Urbino. But the carvings on my high school's walls were more exciting. The 70s, the 60s. I could just about see them out of the corner of my eye as they drifted off stage and into history. The smallest and shortest pieces of art strive for perfection. The largest and longest strive for greatness. I don't feel lonely as I work, but when I look out the window next to my desk, I frequently mistake strangers walking up or down the block for people I know. I hate wasting time and I hate wasting space. I hate chatting and I hate clutter. In college, I was once accused of owning only 6 objects. In my dating days, as soon as I anticipated going to bed with someone, it seemed absurd, irrational, to further resist the inevitable. If there's a good line in a book, I will copy out the line and sell the book. With 10 minutes left in the exam period, I write my best sentence. Holding out for an even better one, I write nothing for the remaining 9. To call a piece of writing a fragment, or to say it's composed of fragments, is to say that it, or its components, were once whole, but are no longer. A woman starts a rumor that I slept with a man in another woman's bed. 15 years pass. I look her up on the internet and find 3 DUI mugshots. In the first, she's the pretty redhead I remember from college, maybe a few cracks in the veneer, but in the last one, she's obese, ruined. I still don't forgive her. I pity her, but I won't forgive her just for being pitiable. Hating her is an act of respect. I sat at my college desk, looked out the window at the 3 church spires, pretended it was the 19th century, and felt privately embarrassed. I remember the embarrassment better than I remember the view. The first beautiful songs you hear tend to stay beautiful because better than beauty, which is everywhere, is the memory of first discovering beauty. Details aren't automatically interesting. I'd like to meet someone whose passage through life has been continuous, whose life has happened to an essential self, and not been just a series of lives happening to a series of selves. In a long relationship, you learn exactly what to do to get each other off. It becomes mechanical. But you also learn exactly what to do to enrage each other. It becomes mechanical. The pleasures of a long relationship are the things you never quite learn about the other, the ways in which you remain strangers. The full moon is saying, "Oh," but the sun is silent. Am I happy? Damned if I know, but give me a few minutes and I'll tell you whether you are. Sometimes the bedroom light goes on and off 3 times fast. It turns on in the night and stays on. The fan starts and stops. I was angry at the ghost for months, would shout at it to stop trying to scare me. Now I understand, it's just lonely. It's easier to speak to a crowd, to stare into a spotlight, than it is to look into a human face. Everyone considers his own life a universally applicable model, and I'm no exception. When someone insults you, it will infuriate him if you pretend to misunderstand the insult as a compliment. Interesting people aren't interested in appearing interesting. A friend visits with a basket in each hand, her twin sons. She feeds them, changes them, carries them, and lays them down with perfunctory attention. She says, "Sometimes I think, it's been 7 months. Where in the world is their mother?" Some people love only those they can condescend to, those they can tenderly despise. When I confessed my age, he asked, "Are you married?" When I kissed him goodnight, he said, "Again." And I kissed him again, and he begged me to come out with him and his backwoods friends on the last night of their once-in-a-lifetime trip to the city. Sincerity that pure was impossible to include in my life then, and I had to turn away. It was like looking at the sun. The first time you love someone who doesn't love you back, it seems wrong, not morally, but logically. A river flowing up a mountain. How can such a feeling be wrong? You'll return to that very river as many times as it takes. Outsiders pretend to be insiders, and it makes them unlikable. Insiders pretend to be outsiders, and we love to play along. Parental love is a one-way, all-consuming love, like a crush that asks nothing of its object. You can inhabit it totally, and no one will try to heal you of it. One must be able to empathize with a suicide, yet not become one. The well-adjusted seem to distribute their fear across their lives, not just keep it in one area, so it seems to disappear. My husband sees the apartment as a series of particulate spaces and moments, but I see it as one entity, so we always disagree about its tidiness. Whatever you're feeling, billions already have. Feel for them. It's interesting to watch my friend speak carefully about what he thinks I'll find interesting. Some people will punish you merely for witnessing their weakness, even if they sought you out and asked for help, even if you helped, especially if you helped. A woman I knew was so attached to the idea of having a terrible secret, she told me the same secret 3 times, each time as if for the first time. Preferable to accepting one's insignificance is imagining the others hate you. My teacher told us about having to sort a box of objects in a psychiatric research experiment. An alarm rang. His time was up. The test was designed to measure how long it took for subjects to declare the objects unsortable. My teacher was so proud. He said it meant he had schizophrenic tendencies. I didn't do it for the money, says my friend who appeared in a pornographic film. I did it for the shame. You can choose your friends, but not your friendships. Among those with less, I try to distract them from the imbalance. Doing so feels like theft. Among those with more, I try to distract them from the imbalance. Doing so feels like charity. Thank heaven I don't have my friends' problems, but sometimes I notice an expression on one of their faces that I recognize as secret gratitude. Keeping a debt is a gift to the giver. It renders him generous. Compare and despair intone the self-help Bibles. But without anyone to compare myself to, how would I know what constitutes a human life? In 20 years, I have had 4 students who could listen with superhuman attention. All of them were dancers. Is it a failure of my imagination that I've never been able to summon any genuine feeling about a sports team? I'm lying. The Red Sox, 2004 postseason. But that was the only time. And it was an affectation of someone else's enthusiasm. There must be birds that sing or fly better or worse than other birds of their species. I've never noticed any, but the birds have. Thank you.